All right, everybody. I think, this is a session that's probably, it's well attended for a reason. Talking about tech efficiency, what it means to your shop, what it can do for you. Before we get started, there's a good amount of polls here. We want your feedback as we're going through this session, so have that app ready. We're gonna have some questions for y'all, and obviously have that app ready because we're gonna do some Q&A at the end, and that's where you're gonna be able to submit those questions. But joining me today to talk about technician efficiency, what it can do for your shop, Peter Cooper, welcome to the stage.
Morning, everyone. Apparently this is a popular topic. So I'm Peter Cooper. Who am I? Why am I up here talking about this? Like most of you, I started a shop. I started it from scratch. I grew it to a decent sized shop, and I was able to luckily sell it successfully and merge with a larger organization, ultimately running 6 locations and about 100 techs. I am a farmer from a small town in Iowa, and I did later become a master tech. So education has always been very important to me, and that's why I'm here today, is to help all of you maybe understand some things about business, maybe understand things about pay scales, maybe hopefully just see a different perspective. And I've been able to turn decades of that experience of being a tech but also running business to develop some programs that hopefully will help you. So one thing we need to talk about in the industry is efficiency. This is a really big topic. I know a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people have talked about it this week. What is efficiency? Well, it's how many hours you pay an individual versus how many hours they produce of work. But unfortunately, most shops are not running very efficiently. And even more unfortunate, some of the smaller shops have pretty bad data, I'm finding, that the owner themselves are billing some hours. They're actually putting work in. They may finish a job, they may do something on the weekends for a customer, but it's really skewing your data, and it's skewing it pretty badly. So I've been able to look at data and pull that out. The average small shop, when I say small shop, it's under 5 million, is running about 50% efficient. When you only look at the techs, you don't look at the total shop production, just look at what the techs are doing. And so this is an example of what 50% efficiency looks like. Say you've got a medium-sized shop, it's got 10 people. The average labor rate right now for a shop in America is $135 an hour, an independent shop, not a dealer. And it kind of looks at what your production is. It's about $27,000 in labor, which you should actually double that because most shops, it's 1 for 1. If you sell $100 parts, you sell $100 labor. But it's pretty dramatic. Look at the difference in income. And this is just per week if you change your efficiency to 100%. That's a lot of money. That's a $54,000 difference in total revenue in 1 week just by increasing revenue, your efficiency of your techs. So I've seen a lot of shops that did introduce some type of bonus plan. Pretty dramatically within about 90 days, they're doubling their efficiency. Now, there's a lot of other things that go into shop efficiency. It's not just how much you pay people, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I want to give an example of what you can do with efficiency with the right motivation, and I love history. So Charles Schwab was put in charge of U.S. Steel in 1921. They had a massive production problem. And you can imagine what steel production is. It's a pretty bad environment. It's dark, it's dim, it's very dirty. But he famously and simply used a technique. And he had a saying. He says, using praise, not criticism. Giving liberal bonuses for a job well done. It was pretty effective. And back then in the 1920s, bonuses in that regard for production employees was a pretty rare thing. But he did kind of an amazing thing. He motivated his people with a piece of chalk. And they had a problem with that the night shift just couldn't produce. And if any of you are running a night shift, you probably have the same problem where the night shift is by far less effective than the day shift. But what he did was he would just go in and ask the shift, how many pours did you do? They call them heats. How many heats did you do? And he would take that number and he would write it on the floor. So that when the next shift came in, they had to walk past that number. And it became a game. And it's a pretty amazing story how you can motivate your people if you just start sharing numbers with them. If you give them what you expect from them and ask them to achieve it. So that's really something you want to think about. Have you really done a good job at strongly laying out what you expect from your people in a number? I use this phrase a lot. You got to give people a quantitative value. You can't just say you did a good job. You need to say you did a good job, and this is why you did a good job. Here's the numbers. And you need to make sure that they have access to those numbers. And one thing I want to remind people is that leadership is not your skill set or your mastery of a skill. Leadership is how good you are at making everyone else better. So if you have a production problem, you might want to truly look in at your systems and what you're doing, but also try to look at your people and see what motivates them. I think a lot of us, because we're owners, we think that numbers, dollars are all that motivate people. There are a lot of other things in life that motivate people other than dollars. So how many of you are offering a bonus program in your shops? So this is pretty on par with the survey that Full Bay did when they asked shop owners if they were offering a bonus. One thing that I did notice was really interesting from the data, and this is something I want to point out, that about 65% of shops responded and said they offered a bonus, meaning the owners, that was their response. But only 49% of techs said that shops offered a bonus. So make absolute sure if you do have some kind of bonus program that it is very clear, because there's an obvious, in the industry as a whole, there's somewhere there's a miscommunication, meaning the technicians do not understand that there's a program and they do not understand how they're getting paid. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of this, and that is the bonus program itself. So this is an example of an incredibly simple bonus program. I actually used this bonus program. I implemented this program. Sorry, wrong slide. Bear with me one second there. They're going to fix this. But I'm a real big believer in using very simple programs. And here's the caveat. I want to start with this about bonus programs. You have to understand that when you're paying an employee, you're not just paying that employee, you're paying his family. And if that tech goes home and his wife thinks he's getting the short end of the stick, his perception is reality. He's getting the short end of the stick. So you need to absolutely make sure whatever you do, that it is simple and it is understood. It cannot be a mystery what that paycheck is going to be. And you really have to think about that as owners of a company, is what the decisions you make, how that impacts their families. Because that person is also making a decision. It's not just the tech that makes a decision whether he stays at a job or leaves a job. It's a family decision. So you need to think about that. But I've seen almost a doubling in efficiency of shops when you implement some kind of program. Like I said, I'm a believer in a very simple program. It should be very simplistic. But one thing I think you guys all need to understand, and I think that you need to be very honest with yourselves and your technicians. I remember having many conversations with people when I interviewed them, and I would ask a technician, why are you here? Why are you in front of me in my office? Why do you want a job here? And they would always say, oh, I love this industry. This is my dream job. I've always wanted to work on trucks. And I would ask them a simple question. So you're going to work for free? And then they would look at me and say, well, no, I want to get paid. I said, well, let's all be true to ourselves. We're here because we want to get paid. And as owners, you need to think about that. I know that you started your shops usually because you wanted financial freedom. You wanted to be able to have that freedom of time. But I think a lot of people lose sight of, we're here to get paid. So I used to have a saying when I owned a shop, Peter gets paid. And I was very honest about that. And I made an agreement with my technicians and said, I'm going to pay you the way I get paid. And we only get paid, because now we're in this together, we only get paid when we bill a customer. So I built a bonus program that was not built on efficiency. I don't like that phrase, honestly. I think it's very misleading. I only cared about build hours, because at the end of the day, you don't bill a customer on efficiency, you bill them on build hours. And also what this does is now you're starting to build a culture in your shop of accountability. Why do I say that? When you hire a tech, you explain to them, we expect this. And how do we measure this? We measure it in build hours. And Full Bay is really good at that, because a technician can go in and look at their home screen, if you have the settings set that way. At any given time, they can look and see, I'm doing good. Or they know I'm doing bad. Because you've established what good is and you've established what bad is, and they know exactly where they're at. And there's no surprises. They know on Friday afternoon what their paycheck next week's going to be, because they see it in real time. They know what their hours are. There is no big mystery. And I also don't advise paying bonuses out monthly. People are very short-minded now. I mean, everybody wants instant gratification. You know, look at Amazon, the way people purchase things. They expect it in a couple of hours now, not a couple of days. So if you pay a person on a monthly bonus, they're probably not going to remember what they did last month to do a good job, which also means they're not going to know what they did last month to do a bad job. And also remember this, I have never wanted to work for a broke boss, and I don't think your employees want to either. So when a lot of people will come up and just ask me straight out, how much should I pay a technician? They're asking the wrong question. The question is, how much can you afford to pay your technician? There's absolutely no reason to pay a guy $50 an hour if that makes you go broke. It just doesn't work. The other thing I like to talk about, and I'll get into this more, is overtime. You absolutely cannot pay bonus if they're working overtime. So you really need to build your system that way, and that's what this does. This is an example of a system, and after the presentation, if anybody wants it, I can share it. This is actually just an Excel file. It takes out, so we'll give an example. If a tech works 45 hours and bills 45 hours, they bonus on 40. I'm not paying you overtime and bonus. That's like double bonus. The other thing you have to think about is bonus programs are not just about technicians, they're about the whole shop.
Can you go back to that just?
Okay, perfect example. So this is something that can be easily implemented in a shop that already only does base pay or hourly pay, because what you can do is you just leave their base pay alone, don't mess with it, and just pay them a bonus. And later on in the slide, we're going to do an example of trying to figure out how much you can afford to pay a tech. But you can change that number in the column to whatever you want. And one thing I've found in years of running businesses and running shops is you generally do not make profit until your technician's above 80% efficient. You're barely getting by if your guys are 80% efficient, depending on what you're charging for a labor rate. But I guarantee you, if you're charging around the national average, you're probably, it's tight. All your money is made past 80% efficient. That's where all your overhead is covered, your benefits are covered, the mortgage, the truck payment, all of those things are covered. All of your profit is in that top 20% of efficiency. But along with efficiency, it's not a one-sided thing. You can't fix trucks with no parts. If you have a parts department that is backlogged and not motivated to do anything, you won't sell any labor. So I highly advise that it's not just, if you really want to increase the efficiency of your shop, you have to build a total program that people are motivated to fix trucks and to bill hours. And that even goes into service advisors and that department. Because ultimately you're trading time for money. So you have to make sure you're bidding these jobs right. Tech efficiency is not always just the technician's fault. I've seen a lot of service advisors undercut a job just to try to get the sale, and then they're setting the tech up for failure. And if the service advisor is not motivated by a system that makes everybody work together, you end up with departments that clash. I mean, I've always said for years, there's no technician on the planet that if you give him 5 hours to do a 10-hour job is ever going to be efficient. Especially any of you in the Rust Belt. I know people from out west are spoiled, they've never seen Rust, but the people in the Rust Belt know what I'm talking about. There's no such thing as a normal job when you're dealing with a 20-year-old truck. Everything you touch falls apart. And you got to think about that in your process when you're quoting. But I encourage everybody gets a bonus, if you can. It's just something you need to think about. So here's an example of people ask me, how much should I pay a tech? How much can you afford to pay a tech? You can afford to pay a tech 17% of your gross. You bill $100, you can't pay them more than 17, or you're going to be like 30% of shop owners that don't take a paycheck. So if you're like me and Peter gets paid and you're here to make money, that's what you can afford to pay a tech. Now, can you pay a tech more? Yes. Who suffers? The owner. The other thing might be, and everybody has a different situation. This is why this is such a complex situation. If you inherited your shop, the land is paid for, you don't have a mortgage payment, you are doing it different than your competition. This is why I strongly encourage people, just absolutely forget about someone else's charges. Until your customer leaves and says, I'm leaving because you're too expensive. Then maybe worry about it. But you don't know what their expenses are. You don't know if they have a $5 million mortgage payment and they're servicing at 8%. You know? You may have it, or you may have a shop in a small town that your rent is really cheap. I was lucky the shop I started, I had really cheap rent. I was 1 mile off the interstate and my rent was incredibly inexpensive. So I had more money to pay people. But ultimately it comes down to budgeting. It's how much money do you want to make? And I encourage owners too that when you're looking at building your business and setting your goals, like Mike talked about yesterday, set the goal of where you want to be in 5 years. I strongly tell you, forget about your total sales. Total sales means nothing. If you make $5 million and take nothing home, what was the point? You know, the average shop owner in America makes $70,000 a year. That's what they take home. Most of them would be better off closing the doors and going to work for Peterbilt. I guarantee you they'd love to have you, and I guarantee you they'll pay you more than 70 grand a year. So you really have to think about that. I tell people, start with the end in mind. If you want to make $1 million profit, then make that your goal. Don't make sales a goal. Focus on what really matters, and that's profits. And I ask a question to you. Can any of you afford to pay a entry-level oil change technician $50 an hour? Do any of you think you can afford that? If he bills $80 an hour, 80 hours a week, can you afford that? You probably can. If he bills the work of 2 people, can you pay him for the work of 2 people? I want that tech on my payroll because my expenses have now gone down. I would much rather manage 5 people than 10. I would much rather work on 10 trucks a week than 20 trucks a week because it's really about profitability. Building a bonus program is like playing chess. It's very easy to pick up, it's very hard to implement. It is a very dynamic situation. There are no easy answers. It does take a lot of work. There are lots of different pay scales. Every one of you does something different. You know, if you're a body shop versus a high production independent, because maybe you work on a fleet. But I do encourage hourly with a production bonus, and the other reason why is if you're lucky enough to be in a state like Texas that can do flat rate, you're lucky. Because I guarantee you go to a state like Michigan, you will never get by with paying flat rate. You will never hire a single person because it's a different mindset. Those are heavily unionized areas. They don't believe in that type of system. It's just not how it works. But you can pretty much implement this pay scale anywhere. And especially if you have the aspirations of having multiple shops, possibly in multiple states, you have to consider that. Is what you build today, will it work? And I'm usually a big believer in telling people a little bit today is better than a lot tomorrow. When it comes to payment plans, you need to really do your research. It is very hard to change the way you pay people once you do it. You have to be very careful, and you have to consider that what I mentioned earlier. What you're doing will affect their family. You know, you put up some new lights in the shop, you get maybe some new equipment, that doesn't affect anybody but the tech. You start messing with their pay, you're affecting everybody. Plus, the hourly plus bonus is mildly flexible because you're not messing with their base pay. Especially with, and you have to really consider this too, is as the world changes, are you going to change what you do? You know, 5 years ago, if you were working on nothing but tractors, over-the-road trucks, it was easy to make a living. If you have a shop that works on 100% OTR, it's really hard to make a living right now with freight the way it is. So you have to think about that too. Will the economy change, and will you change as a shop and work on different things? How much overtime are you paying your techs? And we're talking on average, just if you have a rough idea.
All combined or just each?
What's the average tech getting in overtime? Is the average guy working 10 hours a week? Is the average guy working 5 hours a week overtime? So I challenge you to this. After this, I'll buy you a steak dinner if any owner can sit down and put pen to paper and prove to me that overtime is profitable. This is a really, really topic that everybody wants to argue with. But answer me this. If the cost of a part increased by 50%, would you charge the customer more for it? Then why, when you increase your cost of labor by 50%, do you not charge more for it? and then tell me you're still making money on overtime. Now, I'm not saying overtime is bad. Understand this. But when you're building a shop and you're building a system, you need to plan for the norm and deal with the exception. So build a system where overtime is not the norm, it's the exception. Because I guarantee you that that's where all your profits are going, it's going in overtime. And one other thing to be very cautious of, if this bill gets passed through the government and there are no taxes on overtime, how motivated will your people be to work more overtime? And studies absolutely show, and keep in mind, there's no tax benefit to the owner of a business by paying out more overtime. There's just a benefit to the employee, which I don't disagree we should do. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is you need to understand that that may change some mindsets. That wife may say, oh, it's not so bad that you work Saturdays now, right? Because now I'm not paying all that tax. Because everybody complains about that, right? How their tax goes up so much when they work overtime. So just understand that might be coming. But back to the way you structure your business. I can tell you as a matter of fact, I've got 25 years experience and I'm a master tech. And if I came to interview at your shop and you told me you work Saturdays, I'd say goodbye. I'm not working Saturdays. I've got too many years and too much experience. I'll go work somewhere else that doesn't work Saturdays. And another thing, how many of you think it's harder now to hire and find a qualified tech than it used to be? I'm going to ask you this. Think about this way. And I actually had a bit of an epiphany this morning sitting eating breakfast with a group of shop owners. Are the techs today really that bad? Or are you really that good? Think about it this way. When you were a young tech and you first started out, I guarantee you thought that other guy they hired in, that B, that A tech, that dude was a whiz bang. Man, he just had the world. He knew what he was doing. Is it really that those techs are that bad, or have you just increased that much? In other words, were you just that bad of a tech when you created that mindset of what a good tech meant to you? Maybe you're just better now. So you really have to think about when you're building a system to employ humans, are you expecting too much from them? And I was very lucky that I worked with my wife for a couple years in the shop, and she would pull me aside sometimes and say, you're asking too much of them. And I said, I don't understand. I can do that. She says, you're right, but they're not you. And you have to understand that as an owner. Your employees are not you. It's not their business. Their name isn't on the wall and they don't write the checks. And you shouldn't expect that from them, because frankly, if they had that mindset, they would have their own shop. They wouldn't be working for you. So you really need to understand who works for you and what do they want. And working overtime, I'm going to tell you, it's not the thing anymore. You know, that's the catchphrase, work-life balance and this and that. I'm not saying it's bad. Yeah, if you've got a clutch job and it needs an extra hour overtime, good, do it. But stop scheduling people to work overtime. You're not making money. That's where all your expenses go. And they'll say, oh, but I got a bill. It doesn't matter how much money you make. What matters is how much you keep. So it doesn't do you any good to do $1 million a year in revenue if you take nothing home. How many of you are open Saturdays now? Scheduled. And keep in mind, I'm making a blank statement. I don't know your business. I don't know what you do. I don't know your financials. All I'm trying to get at is think about it. Just maybe step back and take an approach at your business. Maybe the reason you can't hire techs is you make them work Saturdays. And maybe you say, oh, but all of our people, they're okay with working Saturdays. Are they? And maybe they are okay. But that guy you're trying to hire, he's not okay with that. So that's a lot. 71% of shops are open Saturday. I can tell you right now that my life changed when I stopped being open Saturdays. I worked less and made more money. And you know what? My family was a lot happier. I used to work so much that the only time I saw my kids was when they were in the service truck with me. And I went out and bought a crew cab service truck just so I could spend some time with my kids. My priorities were in the wrong place. Because that's the experience that I expected from my employees. And that's not realistic. And on top of that, I started realizing I was attracting the wrong people. High-functioning people are smart people. They kind of got it figured out. That's why they're good. So you got to think about that. Is your shop culture attracting the right people. And I tell owners this too. If you have a dimly lit, disorganized shop, you are going to attract dimly lit, disorganized people. And one thing you need to think about as an owner of a business, if you're trying to attract top talent, is if you want to be this level of shop tomorrow and you're here today, be your future self today. Be that shop now. Because when that fleet shows up, when Penske or Ryder shows up and needs some help, and they see your shop or they see you the way you're dressed, that's their first impression. And that's what they're going to think. So that's another thing to think about, is what image you produce publicly and why would people want to. I pose this question to every shop owner here. Why would someone want to work for you? Does anybody have a good example of why their shop is the shop to work at? What do you do that makes you special?
We have a better culture than anybody in our industry, in our area. We pay better. We have the best incentive program for our team in the area, and we have made ourselves a destination workplace. We've won 3 years in a row for one of the best places to work in Washington.
I guarantee you that her recruiting cost is less than yours.
We have no idea what she said.
She said that she had a well-rounded shop that worries about culture, and I'm assuming work-life balance. Yep. I love that you didn't use the word family, because I run like heck when I heard the word family. Because family, in my world, I grew up as a farmer. And when you went to work for family, you worked like a mule and got nothing. So I love that people don't use that word. But she said that it's a well-rounded shop and they've actually won awards for their culture. And it matters. I actually had a reputation in my little tiny town. It's a 2-street town. Look it up. It's Cumming, Iowa. It literally has 2 streets. And there were shop owners, or not shop owners, there were trucking company owners that would purposely stop by our facility to eat lunch. Now, I built a culture of that. I grew up on a farm. It was our responsibility to feed our workers. We literally shut down the shop, went to grandma's house 3 days a week for lunch. And we had a reputation for that. That was our thing. I'm not saying you have to do that, but know what your thing is and own it. You have to understand, when you do an interview today, you're not interviewing them. They're interviewing you. It's completely flipped from the way it was 20 years ago. That guy's got 10 job offers. You need to figure out what makes you special and then own it. If what makes you special is you have a great culture, sell that. My shop, we fed everybody. For me, it was totally selfish, because if my guys left them and got lunch, it was over an hour, because the next town that had a restaurant was almost an hour round trip plus the time to eat. So we just did that. But we did. We'd have people come in and interview and they're like, "Oh, you're that shop that feeds everybody lunch." I'm like, "Yeah, that's us." And it matters. People see that. You start to gain a reputation. So think about that, what your reputation is in your industry. And I've heard some people talk about some of the dealerships and the way they treat people, and just remember that's why they're there to work for you and not the dealers. So this is another example of overtime. So a recent survey through Fullbay, the state of heavy duty repair, if nobody's seen that report, it's really, really eye-opening information, said that the average technician works 45 hours a week. So they're working 5 hours of overtime. So I did a little demonstration of what happens to your shop when you work 5 hours of overtime. And I know there's not a lot of numbers up there, but basically you lose 3% of net. So everybody get out your calculator. If you know what you made last year in net, now take that times 3%, add another 3% in there, and tell me that number isn't worth maybe looking at how you structure your work. See, the key to success in business is not working more. It's working less more efficiently. And I would rather have 5 techs that are 100% efficient than 10 techs, because that's a lot of work to manage 10 guys. Anybody have any questions on this, the math, or why it makes sense?
Have you ever put the numbers to what the overtime is covering the work versus another tech, benefits, SUDA, FUDA, FICA, unemployment, workers' comp?
I haven't. You know why? Because I don't build a system that's reliant on overtime.
Okay.
You're talking about the exception. And yes, we can do that, absolutely. And that's what I meant a comment on. He asked if I've ever read the numbers of how much overtime a person can work before it costs the cost of another employee. Because there's another cost I dare you to look at, and that's the cost to the human. These people are not machines. There is a reason why 40 hours is the average work week, or that's the defined work week. We've got a lot of history of people working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. It was incredibly dangerous, and a lot of people died in factories and in mines. And there's a reason why we all came to an agreement that 40 hours was a normal week. And there's a lot of studies that will prove to you that the efficiency goes down on overtime. Now, there's a caveat to everything I'm saying here on this about overtime. And that is if you are not charging a higher labor rate. If you do after-hour service calls and you're double your labor rate and you guy is good with it and he's not burning out, good, go for it. I did the same thing. But I charged the heck out of after hours. Because if you're going to get me out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's going to cost you. If not, wait till tomorrow. I can't wait. It's going to cost you. So that's basically what I'm trying to get everybody to do, is just run your numbers and think about it. But also think about what system you want to build and what culture you want to build in your shop. So what is your average tech efficiency? So if you run your reports in full bay, what is your shop's average efficiency for techs? The 15% of you that said, I don't know, you should probably come see me or the full bay team afterwards and let's work on some reports. Because you need to know this. This is an example of a KPI in your business. You need to absolutely know this. Now, as I've said before, I do not like efficiency as a number. And I'll tell you why I don't like it. Efficiency is like horsepower. It's a metric of two numbers. All of us in the diesel industry ought to know this. Do we really care about horsepower? Is horsepower what gets you over the hill? Torque is, right? Horsepower is just torque over time. It's how fast you do the work. And efficiency is the same way. I care about build hours. When I coach clients and I motivate managers, I motivate them with numbers. And remember this, if a tech builds 10 hours and works 10 hours and is 100% efficient, are you paying the rent on that? If your tech only builds 10 hours a week, because he always has the Monday flu or has lots of whatever issues, right? We all have had that tech that always has the Monday flu. But that's my point. You need to base it on build hours. And I encourage you to do that with your managers and the business as a whole. Set your target. We need to bill 100 hours this week. Have that be the target. It's much easier to look at the numbers really quickly and say, hey, we're only 88 billed hours this week. We got to go find some time. And a lot of time when you start looking that way, it's something as simple as saying, hey, I didn't close that job. I know we've all had technicians that go home on Friday and didn't close their job. I guarantee you when they see that directly is related to their paycheck, they're really motivated to make sure that their work orders are closed on Friday when they go home. And that's what this is all about. It's all about motivating good behavior and building a system where everybody is there to do the same thing. The other thing is you need to have standards. I strongly encourage all of you to have a standard when you hire an employee. In my shop, it was 80%, 32 billed hours. You had to have 32 billed hours. And if you got to come back, of course, it came off that. And what that does is that establishes a culture in your business where it makes you easier to manage. You do less work. And I can give you a story about that. I had a technician, her name was Marie. One of the best technicians I ever had. Marie was a great employee. Marie went through some personal problems. And then she became a light switch. And I hate light switch employees. One day she was good, one day she was bad. I can work with consistently bad. I can work with consistently slow. I can't work with on, off, on, off. But we had built a culture in our shop where Marie knew that she was not doing well. You know, we went over numbers weekly. Everybody had to come to the morning meeting on Monday morning, and it was part of our culture. You talked about what your build hours were last week. And if you had a challenge, it was everybody's responsibility to make you better. because we were all in it together. But Marie came to me one day and says, I can't work for you anymore. I said, well, why is that? She says, because I don't meet your standards anymore. In 18 years of business, I've only fired 2 employees because they all knew what I expected of them, and they would just quit. They would fire themselves. Or I was really good at convincing them that this was not the best place for them to work anymore and they should move on. I was even good enough at giving them a recommendation to the shop down the street I didn't like. Hey, I got a tech for you. But it's serious. When you build a culture where everybody knows what to expect, they'll leave. They know they're not on the bus anymore. And my people that have worked with me understand that philosophy. It was on the bus or off the bus. And they would just get off the bus at the next stop. They realized it was not for them anymore. Which is the same thing with when you have a shop where people are accountable. They're accountable for making them other employees better. I challenge you that if you have a lead tech, pay your lead tech on how well everyone else does. I never expected more than 75% from my lead tech because I wanted him on the floor working with people. But his bonus was directly tied to how good the shop did as a whole. That man was highly motivated to make sure those technicians closed their work orders on Friday. He was highly motivated to make sure there was no comebacks because it directly affected his paycheck. And ultimately, if you think about it, your lead tech, your foreman, that's what they're there for, isn't it? Aren't they there to make all the techs better? To answer that question, to walk by and say, hey, if you just do it this way, you're going to save like 2 hours. Like, what are you doing? Why are you trying to pound that carrier bearing off? If you just go get the torch, you can have it off in 5 minutes, right? But they don't know that, Technicians don't know that if you take a bearing race and put it in the freezer, you don't have to do any work. You just pop it in the hub and you're done. But if nobody ever teaches them that, how do they know? And if you've built a culture in a shop where it's just me, then nobody helps each other. Which is why you really got to think about when you're building a bonus program, is it motivating everyone to do their job together? Which is why I talk about lead tech and how that person needs to be paid off of the shop's production. I have a saying with Full Bay, red, you're dead. I'm a firearm instructor for my kids' shooting team. And I always teach them with safety on a gun. When you see red, you're dead. It's not unsafe. Same thing with Full Bay. I strongly encourage you as managers to have at least 2 or 3 screens with different things on it. And one of them better be your tech home screen. And you can hit the little control negative and shrink it way down. You don't need to see everything that's going on. But seriously, walk into the office and see how many technicians are on. If any of you got a computer, jump on right now. See if John's goofing off. Jump on your computer and see how many technicians are on red. It might blow your mind. You can tell what's going on in the shop really easily by just looking at that. I had a technician that I could not figure out why his efficiency bounced between 30 and 50%. It just blew my mind. I'm like, I don't understand. Because this kid knows how to do his job. He wasn't an A tech. He wasn't rebuilding engines, but he was a solid suspension guy, which is usually a pretty straightforward job. You're just hanging parts, not a lot of diag going into that. And then he would clock in at 8 o'clock. But I went back and looked at all of his punches, and I wish I could have pulled this up, but I just couldn't make it fit on the screen. So I can maybe show you if nobody understands what I'm talking about. But I would look at his time punches. I looked at it for a month. He would clock in at 8 o'clock. Good employee, always on time. That was never the issue. But everybody's got that employee that clocks in and decides, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. Or I need to go get a cup of coffee. Or I'm going to stand around and talk for half an hour because it's not my fault that the service advisor doesn't have anything for me to do. I guess I'll just stand in the corner and wait for something to do. And that's exactly what he was doing. And nobody could figure out what was going on until we dove into the data and we could see it. So there again, if you have a bonus program where they get paid off of what they do, they're motivated to stay busy. Unless the guy doesn't like money. And you know what? Sometimes you'll have employees that don't like money. I had an employee, his name was Tommy. Tommy was a cool kid, I liked him. He was kind of like me, grew up on a farm, real down to earth. And we went to 410s at our shop because we ran into a space problem where we just didn't have enough space for the work. So we split our shifts. We did an A team and a B team. And an A team was service advisor, 4 techs, lead tech. And then they alternated 3 days of the week. It was really crowded, but Mondays and Fridays were much less chaotic, which was good for the office staff and parts. But Tommy came to me and said, I don't want to work 4 days a week. I said, why, Tommy? He says, I don't want to be home with my wife. You might think about that if you got a guy who likes working 60 hours a week. I said, well, I got a solution for you. How about this? How about you come to work 5 days a week, you work your 410s on your other days, and you go fishing on Wednesdays. Because I really needed an extra guy on Wednesday. I didn't need any more on Monday and Friday. He thought that, or I didn't need an extra guy on Wednesday. I needed more guys Monday and Friday, because that was our split. He thought that was the greatest thing ever. And I'm not saying everybody do that, but you can be creative. I also had another technician that said, hey, I don't want to work overtime. I don't want to make more money. I said, who doesn't want to make more money? He says, I'm paying alimony. I don't want to give her any more money. I said, that's fine. How about some extra vacation? He says, awesome. I said, I'll make you a deal. As long as you hit 80% efficiency for the year, you get an extra week of vacation. And you can do the math. I mean, how much you give them is up to you. I'm just saying that not everyone is motivated by money. Sometimes it's other things. But I encourage you to adapt a saying, red, you're dead. And I would tell every single technician that. I would tell them when I walk by, because it would be on their tech home screen. They'd be clocked in, but not clocked into a job. And I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, I'm working. I'm like, no, you're not. Because if it's not in writing, it's not real. And the computer says you're not working. And another reason why this is so dangerous, and this is how I sold them on it, is when I first started my shop, the most challenging thing I did, because I came from a fleet background, was how much do I charge people to fix something? And absolutely how much is equated to how long, right? I didn't know how long it took to do something. I came from a fleet. We didn't care. Just get it done. And we were notoriously always over on doing clutches on dump trucks. And I could not figure it out because I'm like, the book says it's 10 hours. What are we doing wrong? Well, it was everything else. I didn't think about it. You know, I've seen some of the cleanest dump trucks I've ever worked on. They're beautiful. And you get underneath and there's 3 inches of dirt and grease on top of the transmission. You can't even find the bolts, right? Or it's got 2 or 3 PTOs on it, or something else, like the upfit has gotten in the way. Which is, by the way, why I strongly encourage that you don't just quote jobs, that you physically look at it first, because there's only one person that can tell you, hey, there's a PTO in the way, and that's the technician on the floor. That's not your book, and it's not the service advisor. Because if you guys don't know this, your SRT times, those are built off day 2 of the life of the truck. Today it rolled off the assembly line, tomorrow we tore it apart. That is not an accurate representation of the world we live in. Especially if you work on vocational trucks that are upfit. I've worked on some cranes that, they put a lot of PTOs on a crane. So one of the ways you increase your efficiency is educate your techs. You have to share the numbers with them. They also don't understand how long it takes to do a job. We did not understand that a clutch in a dump truck was taking us 15 hours because we had no data to back it up. That is why it's so important that you teach your technicians that clocking in is important. I understand if you give a guy a PM job and it's got a brake chamber on it, it really doesn't matter if he clocks into each line, per se. But some jobs do. Perfect example. How many of you quote an electrical diagnostic? I bet everybody in here, it's a time and material job. You really need to know how long it took them to find the short in the wiring harness on the trailer. The other thing is that also, if you ever have a customer complain or dispute a charge, you can just show them the timestamp. Say, this is what it took, guys. We have proof. But anytime that you want to prove a point that technicians have no idea how long it takes, walk up to one of your technicians and ask them how many hours they spent on Facebook last week. I did this to my wife once. That was a horrible fight. Don't ever do that. Do not ever bring up how long they're on Facebook to a wife. But my point is they'll have no idea. You know, you can open up your phone and it'll tell you how many hours you spent on a given app. Most people have no idea. That's one of the fundamentals of why this software works so well, is it's not really hard to keep track of time. And here's an example of what happened to this tech's efficiency. Because you're not clocking in right. And this is where we get into what's called utilization. What is utilization? Utilization is how long are they actively doing something. Now keep in mind, utilization can never be over 100%. That's not how it works. It's impossible. Utilization is their clock time versus time they're clocked into a job. Now of course we all want it as close to 100% as we can, but it never will be. So just understand that. It's different than efficiency. But sometimes when you look at a technician, they have super low efficiency, but or they have high efficiency but low utilization, you're like, hey, we're good. He's 100% efficient. And I don't disagree with you. That is good. But what if? What if you had a technician that was 100% efficient, but utilization was only 75%? What is he capable of?
Quick work.
Well, is he capable of doing over 100% efficiency? Could he bill 50 hours a week? So just understand that sometimes you get what I call the success syndrome. You'll get a technician that's always 100% efficient and they get comfortable and they think I've succeeded, so I'm good. Maybe think about that, about constantly pushing your guys a little bit. A lot of push is not good, but a little bit is. So another thing to think about is the way you quote a job. There's this phenomenon in psychology called Parkinson's law, and it states that work will fill the void of time that you give them to do it. And what does that mean? If you give someone 10 hours to do an 8-hour job, anybody guess how long it takes to do the job? It takes 10 hours. So I strongly encourage you to go back and start working with your service advisors to intentionally give your people 20% more work than they can get done. Now, is it going to mess up your scheduling? Yes, you have to think about that. What I'm saying is I've done this before. I've gone to my guys and say, look guys, I hate to push you on Friday afternoon, but this bus has a run, it has to go. We have to have this thing done tonight. And I'm sure we've all done this. But if you're very clear about timelines and what you expect from them, it's amazing what people can do. So I encourage you to do that. Maybe give them 10 hours worth of work in a day. You'll be surprised what they'll get done. And I'm not saying you shove it down their throat. I'm saying feed the machine. When they show up to work on Monday morning, you better have 10 hours worth of work for them to do. Because I can tell you that the least efficient shops, the very first thing I look at is how much time they spend standing around. And it's usually a lot. And it's because of something that no one thinks about in shops, and that's information. How hard is it for your technicians to get information? How hard is it for them to look up a torque spec? How hard is it for them to get a work order? One thing I did in every shop that I ran is every technician has 2 work orders at any time. Why? Because that technician, as soon as he's done, sends a message to the office, says, I'm done, I'm moving on. Or, hey, I hit a roadblock, I tore the gasket on the water pump, we're gonna have to get another one. Cool, go to the next one. And as soon as he says I'm moving on, he gets assigned another job. Now, I wouldn't give him too many jobs because sometimes they're like, oh, which one do I do first, blah, blah, blah. But just think about that. Are you keeping your technicians busy? Another thing to think about is what do technicians want? So there's this really interesting story that Wrenchway does, a survey, where it talks about what do technicians want. What do technicians want? It's not pay. This is from technicians. It's actually the report is called Voice of Technician. What do technicians want? They want to work in a good environment. They want a clean, well-lit shop. And I guarantee you, if any of you out here have an air-conditioned shop, you probably have a lot less hard of a time hiring a technician because that's what they want. And you know what? That's what the dealers are doing. Every single new dealership I've seen them go up in the last 3 years has been air-conditioned. And I understand you can't do that. Then make it a goal. Make it a goal that in 5 years you can either build a new shop or have a shop with AC if that's what you want to do. But you need to have a conversation with your techs about goals, about numbers, and I would encourage you to set that. I would encourage you to set quarterly goals with your technicians and try to get that efficiency number up. You need to tie bonuses to achievement, not to just production. So if you can have some kind of team bonus, so one of the things I would do is I went out and bought everybody in the shop a 1/2-inch Milwaukee impact gun. I set it on the counter next to the office with a little sign that was the goal of the quarter. And when they hit that goal, that was the team goal. Or it may be you get pizza on Friday, it's whatever. It may be creative, right? Some of the coolest things we've ever done were things we thought were silly. Like our cookie decorating contest was crazy. I mean, everybody loved that, and it was cheap. You just go get some cookies, some frosting, that's what we did for Christmas. And then we just grab whatever random parts guy was walking in with parts and say, hey, come over here and judge this. This is my contact information. If anybody wants a example comprehensive pay plan for a shop, shoot me an email. I will send it to you. It is an Excel file, and I'd be happy to set up a meeting with anybody and walk them through, because it is an interactive thing where you punch in the numbers and it spits out a bonus dollar. We've got a couple minutes left. Any questions? You can get on your app and put in any questions you might have. I am going to say one thing, because I just saw a question come in, and this is a common misconception. I am not saying don't pay overtime. What I'm saying is build a bonus program, which most states have a very liberal regulation on that, but check your local states, because you people in California, I don't know how you do business, because you can't do anything. Everything you do is wrong. You're like the redheaded stepchild of the world. They don't want businesses in California. They must not want any more taxes either. But anyways, yes, you absolutely have to pay overtime. That's a federal labor law. You can't get away from that, guys. And by the way, I know a lot of tow truck companies that got hit really hard with not paying overtime. Lots of stories on that. But yes, you have to pay it. What I'm saying is don't pay bonus and overtime. Like I said, if they work 45 hours, they billed 45 hours, they bonused on 40, because you took the 5 hours overtime away. The sheet that I have, it automatically does that.
Peter, go, excuse me. Go ahead, hit it. Clicker one more time. We'll get there we go. We'll start with this one at the top. Can you explain the cost of direct labor with parts line at 17%?
Okay, what that means is, and I only have so much space on that because that's an overly simplified 5 KPIs to run your business on. I know that there was a big, long, hour-long session on how to do a budget. I like to start people off easy, the KISS philosophy. If we're going to talk about budget, let's make it simple to begin with. What that number was the labor cost of your parts person, unless you sell parts retail, and then that needs to be its own category. But most people don't.
Got the next one here. How do you account for large jobs, over 30 hours that aren't completed within the pay period, affecting the technician's efficiency, until it's invoiced?
I love this topic because there's such an easy solution to it. Stop writing your tickets that says overhauled engine, $16,000. It needs to be removed head, inspected head, cleaned head, removed things. Because here's the thing about people. They love to win. Give them the small wins. So when you do a clutch, break it up. Remove transmission, action item. Install transmission, action item. R&R clutch, action item. Replace input shaft. I mean, it's not that hard to break it up into 4 things. And I get if you run a really large shop and like a body shop and you've got a $90,000 wreck and it's got 100 action items on it, there again, guys, that's the exception, not the norm. What I'm talking about is let's build a system, a plan that deals with the normal. And doing a clutch is normal. Break it up. I know most shops theoretically say I can do a clutch in one day. Most don't get it done in one day. You certainly don't get overhauls done in one day. So I would strongly encourage you just break it up into smaller bites.
I personally love this one. How do you go about changing a foreman's mindset from completing tasks for the technician to teaching them how to do it?
Well, this is the hardest thing you do as a manager, right? Because you don't fix trucks, you fix people. How do you do it? I don't know. I don't know the guy. One way to do it is show them the path. Say, this is what we need from you. And you know what? Like I say, if the guy's not on the bus, it might be time for him to get off. And I know that's a hard, painful thing to do, but he's the guy who sets the tempo of your shop. His attitude and his belief in your vision is the single most important person out there other than yourself. So if your lead tech, your foreman doesn't believe in what you do and doesn't believe in how you do it, you have a major culture problem. And you need to think about that. But if you show them the numbers and you show them how, like I said, don't take any money away from them. Just give them more. And if they make more money for you, you can afford to pay them more.
Okay. How do you handle a technician that sees an 8-hour job, uses up all the 8 hours, but is definitely capable of more?
Same thing. It's culture. If you build a culture in your shop where performance matters. Another way to do it, maybe gamify it. I mean, that is absolutely something you can do. There's a lot of fun things you can do in a shop when you gamify it. But there again, if you have a guy who's slowpoke and always takes 8 hours for an 8-hour job, then maybe that's all that he's ever going to be. Sometimes a donkey is just a donkey. They're not a racehorse. They're not going to win the Kentucky Derby. Sometimes you got to look at somebody and say, this is who they are. This is all that they are.
Do you have thoughts on profit sharing, or profit sharing plan versus?
I don't
a
like
bonus
profit
program?
sharing, personally. I think that's the only number in a business you shouldn't share with your employees because it's dangerous. When they see that you're making $100,000 bonus or profit, I mean, how you share it to them is matters. But they won't understand what that means. They don't understand that just because you made $100,000 profit, you didn't put a $100,000 bill in your pocket. I think you guys can appreciate that. So I strongly encourage you to be careful with that number. I've seen it go wrong many times.
All right, next one. Are you recommending that shops don't pay more than 17% of the shop rate?
Not if you want to make a living. I mean, it's you, it's your shop. How much money do you want to make? You can give them it all. You know, you can live in your car in the back lot if that's what you want. That's up to you. It's just, what do you want from your business? And if you want to make money, you can't afford to do that if all your other expenses are within that column. And like I said, if your overhead's lower, yeah, you can afford to pay people more. You know, if you inherited the shop from your parents and you're not paying a very high mortgage because dad said, I'll sell it to you for this much and it's reasonable, yeah. It's what you can afford. That's what you need to figure out.
How often would you recommend paying a billed hours bonus?
Weekly. Everybody gets paid weekly in my world because people are short-minded. It's just the reality of today.
What are your feelings on 2 15-minute breaks? What length of time for lunch? And how do you think both affect tech efficiency?
Labor laws matter. Back to that. I used to be the president of a labor union. There's a lot that goes into this. How did I do it in my shop? I was in Iowa, very liberal laws. We didn't take breaks and you didn't clock out for lunch. And I know everybody's gonna say that's crazy. I'm gonna say, no, it's not, because when my guys clocked out for lunch, they were gone for an hour. When I started telling them, hey, you don't gotta clock out for lunch, they ate their lunch in 20 minutes and they went back to work. It's you. It's what culture do you wanna build? 15-minute breaks, there are labor laws that say you have to give them breaks. You don't have a choice. That's the cards you've been dealt. Just like if you have to pay all these taxes and fees in a state like California, for example, that's the card you're dealt. But that all goes into that chart of your budget. That's when you start looking at saying, this is why I'm not making money, because I don't understand where it's all going.
All right, time for a few more. With not working weekends, would you recommend not doing on-call for the employees?
Why would you have people on call if they're not working? I don't fully understand it. If we're talking about like doing after hours and road service, towing, stuff like that, that's up to you, how you want to do it. I think that on-call is kind of a touchy thing because people don't like to be committed without being paid. That's the problem I have with on-call. You're asking me to be available to work, but we're not going to tell you if you're going to work or not. I used to hate that when I worked construction. You'd show up to the job that day and be like, oh, it's canceled. I'm like, hey, thanks for telling me. I'm glad I drove all the way in here and didn't have a doctor's appointment that day. I could have went to the dentist.
How many technicians should I have before hiring a foreman, and how many technicians should there be per service advisor?
Depends on your model. I managed a store that had, I don't know what they do, 8 million in revenue, had 2 service advisors. I had another store that did 3 million in revenue, had 2 service advisors. If you're doing a fleet, a big fleet, and it's rinse repeat, you don't need a lot of service advisor, right? You're not selling anything. You're just punching paper. You have to look at that. You have to look at what model you have and what your customer's needs are. Because keep in mind, the service advisor is there to serve the customer, whether you guys look at it that way or not. Service advisor should be a customer's advocate. The technician should be the truck's advocate. And sometimes they will butt heads because their interests are not always aligned 100%. But you know, a little healthy friction is good.
All right, advice when a technician is consistently going over the expected SO times.
It might be your fault. Same thing. If you give a guy 5 hours to do a 10-hour job, there's nothing he's ever going to do to blow past that. And this is where communication is so important. Why is he going over? Is it because you quoted the job wrong? Is it because he never has all the parts he needs? Is it because maybe the shop environment's bad? I work with shops that I don't even know how they get anything done. It is the most chaotic mess thing. They can't do anything. So you have to look at that. But sometimes it is the tech. And sometimes, like I said, you know, the donkey's not going to win the Kentucky Derby. Maybe that's just all that guy is. And sometimes you have to learn that and start quoting jobs that way. If you know that he always takes 12 hours to do a clutch, maybe you have to quote it as 12 hours.
All right, we'll do the last one here. Is there a good ratio between hourly wage and bonus so that the bonus is, worth enough to get
Personally,
someone going?
I think it's 50-50. I wanted my techs to make $80,000 to $100,000 a year. How did I do that? I showed them the path. And here's another thing I'll tell you real quick about having a bonus program. When you have a technician come into your office, because we've all had this happen, and says, I need to make more money, I said, cool. How much do you want to make? And they'd say, I want to make that much. I said, cool, this is all you have to do. You want to make 120 grand a year, bill 80 hours a week. How do I do that? That's a deeper question. Well, we can work on that. Same thing in interviews. When a guy came into an interview, I would always ask him, how much money do you want to make? And they'd say, well, and I'm like, no, not how much do you think you're worth. Write down on a piece of paper, how much money do you want to make? What is your dream? And I will show you how to do it. Because that's all people equate. When they come in for an interview, they only equate what they think they're worth, not what they can achieve. And if you really want to push your people to be more than average, work on what they want, not what they think they're worth.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. Big thank you for Peter.